Happy Halloween, everybody. This face should scare you. If not, I'm going to tell you a Halloween story that will frighten you forever because it involves your fellow man and lack of science and information. So, first, before we start anything, I need to shout out the Grimalkin Halloween edition, which is backwards in this stupid video. I'm gonna smoke that for today's Halloween story. It's rainy outside, it's kind of cold, dark. Kind of got me thinking about the climate and about the poor people of Salem in 1692. You see, in the olden days, you had to grow your own food, crops, animals, whatever. And your building sucked and your storage sucked. There was no electricity, no AC. If you had a grain shed, it was probably built of stone or wood, depending on your location. And I guarantee you it had gaps in it. It was not weather sealed. You got heat, you got cold, you got water, you got rats, right? You got everything in this stuff. It wasn't a pretty time to be alive. But what we know now is that when you have a grain, such as rye in this case, rye was a popular grain with early civilizations all the way through today still, but primarily our settlers, our forefathers, used rye quite a bit. In fact, George Washington, I think everybody knows this, was a famous moonshiner. It wasn't really moonshine back then because there was no taxation on liquor. However, he used rye. So everybody's using rye, right? Let's just generalize stuff. New England equals rye. So in 1692, let's go back to 1691 though. We know that in 1691, it was a very hot and stormy growing season. And we know that it was a cold and wet winter. And what this means is you grow your rye and you harvest it and you store it and you don't thresh it until November, right? So for 2 months, this grain has an opportunity to sit in the elements, exposure, blah, 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 blah. We know now that there is a fungus that grows in rye, and when consumed or put into the human body responds with symptoms. And the symptoms, it can go two ways. One is called ergot poisoning. One is gangrenous ergot, and the other is convulsive, right? So convulsive ergot poisoning is what we're talking about, boys and girls. And let me break it down. When the fungus grows in the rye and people eat it or expose it in the case of processing the rye for bread making, whatever, or they feed it to their animals, whoever eats that or comes into contact with that mimics the symptoms of LSD. You see crazy things, your skin feels like it's on fire, it's incredibly painful, I've heard. You think and you see bugs crawling all over you, they're biting you, you see things, but mostly it's not a pleasant experience. And especially for the people back then that had no idea they were getting high on psychedelics accidentally, they freaked out. And of course, the only logical explanation was the devil. So you've got these girls, 16 women, 4 men in Salem were killed because of the witch trials. But what started out as possibly an accident, and I've read several papers on this, so I know we're going to have internet warriors, and I'm not saying it's the truth, it's a theory. You got one theory is the devil, here's another explanation, okay? So when these people started having these symptoms, some of the papers and diary entries I've read dating back from 1350 all the way to 1700 describe these same symptoms. And the thing that's peculiar about Salem is, there's still a lot of people that say, well, it wasn't this, it was the devil because of what they did. Well, I actually read a journal entry from somebody from Salem, and they even described the cows as acting this way. Now, either the cows were infected by Satan, possible, I guess, but the cows were not Catholic or Protestant at that time. They had no stake in religion, yet they're tripping on LSD/rye, ergot poisoning, right? So if you go back through history and you look at ergot poisoning, you can essentially piggyback it with the plague all the way back to 900, 1300. I can, I guess, but let's leave it to the scientists. Scientists have gone back and studied the climate through ice, through tree ring growth, through things like that. And everywhere the Black Plague had a really heavy pocketed impact, you can attribute ergot as a companion disease or malady, which weakened the immune system and made the path for the Black Plague very, very easy. So it's not a new thing. The problem is the people with ergot poisoning die. And they don't get better and say, oh, hey, guys, thanks for giving me the vaccine to rye grain because I thought I was possessed by the devil, right? So what do people do? What do people do when they find out anything that's poisonous and it produces an effect, but it doesn't quite kill you if you do it right? What do? We find out just the right dose to figure out how to have a little fun and not die, right? That's what being drunk is. That's drinking alcohol. That's giving yourself just the right amount of alcohol poisoning, okay? Same thing with cigar smoking. You get that nicotine in your body. It's a drug. You smoke 3 or 4, you get shaky. That's nicotine poisoning, okay? Some people might like that and might smoke 4 a day. That's called chasing the high. And so as society progresses, we figure out these compounds. We figure out ergot poisoning. We figure out things like nightshade and other plants that produce similar effects. And leave it to the good people of ancient times with no cable and nothing to do. Necessity or desire is the mother of invention. So people back then, it started to become a thing, man. It was a thing. It's get some rye, get some nightshade, get some other fungus or algae or whatever they're into because they don't know crap about medicine back then. And you put it in a pot, right? And you stir it and you cook it. Sounds like a witch's cauldron. And all that plant material, what color is it? It's green, right? You got a green bubbling pot or cauldron in the witch's house. But really, they're just trying to get high. So one of the tools or methods, and there's several diary entries about this, not as eloquent or more eloquent than I'm speaking, but they talk about a vial of ointment and a greased staff, right? So if you got no needles and you don't want to eat this stuff because ergot poisoning when ingested delivers extreme nausea, vomiting, things like that. You don't want that. You just want to, I guess, be a witch for a while. So what they would do is, okay, so we'll just go for it. What they would do is they would put it on a broom handle and then administer their dose. And, you know, if I look at pop culture on Halloween, witches ride brooms, right? So I found several journal entries from New England in that time, and they talk about a vial of ointment, a greased staff, and flying around, doing the witch's dance, things like that. Oh, by the way, I talked about the 2 kinds of ergot poisoning earlier. Convulsive ergot poisoning is what we're talking about. Gangrenous ergot poisoning was more like, if you've seen Game of Thrones, it was like the stone skin. But back then, they called it holy fire. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't leprosy, it wasn't any of this, and it wasn't some magic dragon scale. It was freaking mold. So the next time you're thinking about Halloween and how scary it is and all the devils and ghouls, check your bread for mold.